Last tape we made what is apparently a very outlandish claim, but I think that anybody that's halfway knowledgeable with Scripture and has any common sense would say that surely that there's something in the Bible about America. But a lot of the pseudo-religious world doesn't want us to know that. But anyway, all of the Christians know that the prophets, that they foretold the future and gave many prophecies which are being fulfilled, yes, in our time. Now it's going to be news to a lot of people that the Bible speaks of the United States of America. Not under the name, of course, but the Bible describes a certain land in such times of definitely that it identifies itself as the United States. However, part of this has been concealed from us. But the deepest students of the Bible, by the unfortunate mistranslation of words commonly used in the King James Version, which I call the King James perversion, and a lot of people get bent out of shape out of that, but I'm very sorry, but it has been perverted by the translators. But so much for that. Let's go to the prophet Isaiah. He was one of the greatly inspired prophets of the Bible, and he foretold of the future of all of the different nations, with one exception, those kingdoms which were important nations and were competing with one another for mastery of Western Asia and the Mediterranean shores. Then in his 13th chapter we find that Isaiah, he names Babylon. He foretells of its coming destruction, even the naming of the Medes as the chief nation by which Babylon would be overthrown. Now, although Isaiah, he wrote this 176 years before the Babylon, or the fall of Babylon, I'm trying to say here, he also foretells that after its destruction, the Arabs would never camp overnight in the site of this ruined city, which is still true even to the day. And in this 14th chapter, we find Isaiah here. He concludes this prophecy against this ancient Babylon, because you have to keep in mind and know and understand we have Babylon still. It denotes, the word Babylon denotes confusion, and it's still all over this world. And then we find that Revelations talks about a new mystery Babylon. It's a mystery to the thundering herds of people out there who just want to go along with whatever's popular. But anyway, and we find that he names other people here. We're still speaking of Isaiah, doomed to be broken as a punishment for their evil ways. The Philistines are one, and we find in the 15th, 16th chapter Isaiah, he prophesies the destruction of another nation, that of Moab. You remember, you've heard me speak of it back in the 25th chapter of Numbers, where it speaks of the children. They were in Shittim, and they were cohabitating with Moab's girls. Well, anyway, so in the 15th and 16th chapter here, Isaiah, he prophesies of the destruction, that of Moab. And in the 17th chapter, Isaiah, he foretells of the fall of Damascus. Well, let's skip over the 18th chapter for the moment, that tells of the destruction of another mighty nation, the great empire of Egypt. And in the 23rd chapter, he foretells of the doom of the powerful commercial seaport of Tyre that we were just talking about. Tyre, this was inhabited with all these Canaanites, and this very powerful, knowledgeable Lord that we say that he or his descendants, it tells definitely of their fall from grace and being kicked out of the kingdom of the Most High. But anyway, let's keep it down to earth and leave the spaceships alone for a minute. We find all these nations, they were pagans, they were enemies of God. They were the Pre-Adamic people, which we're going to get into here in just a little bit. They were diametrically opposed to the Almighty, and the Almighty's patience with their wickedness was near its end. So the prophecies are all prophecies of destruction, and Isaiah lists all of these nations by name. They then had names where they were the important nations of their day. In the midst of all this, in the short 18th chapter, Isaiah speaks of another nation which he does not name, but merely describes it. Unfortunately, the translators, They have sadly garbled this short chapter until the meaning of it is almost totally lost. Correctly translated from the Hebrew, its reference to the unnamed nation found in verse 1, 2, and 3, and 7 reads as thus. Ho. Now, I want you to notice something. The word ho right there, it was woe. See, they screwed up the first word in it, and it meant pay attention. And when you saw this great nation, you had better be paying attention. Woe to the land of buzzing wings, which lies beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, that sends its ambassadors out by sea, its water-drinking vessels upon the water. Excuse me. Go ye, you swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth-shaven, to a people terrible from their beginning onward, a nation measured out by lines underfoot, whose land the waters divide. At that time there shall a present be brought to the Lord of hosts, a people tall, smooth-shaven, a nation measured out by lines underfoot, whose lands the rivers quarter, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts, Mount Zion. Now all over this country you find little towns and etc. and so forth, Mount Zion, etc. Now let's examine this very unusual description and see which nation it will fit. It's not named. And as we shall see, for the very good reason, that is the time when Isaiah wrote, it had no name, for it did not yet exist. The first strange thing we note is the land of the buzzing wings. Now, nearly all of you that have heard me on these other tapes, and at this moment you hear the drone of airplanes in the sky. No other nation in the world has skies so filled with buzzing wings day and night as our United States. And I want you to know that the predominance of 99% of all of the commercial transport planes of any nation in this world was made right here in this country. But now, once again, we're going to lose out to Japan and the Europeans, dumb white boys. Next, where is it located? Isaiah said it's beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, and the rivers of Ethiopia are the tributaries unto which the great river Nile flow northward to the Mediterranean Sea, due west of Jerusalem. Look straight west from Jerusalem, and the prophet Isaiah wrote these words, and your line of vision shall cut across the mouth of the river Nile, and across the North African shores through Libya and Tunisia and Algeria and Morocco. And none of these which can possibly answer to any part of this description of this mysterious nation that was to suddenly appear, so to speak, born in today. And so we keep going. Now, America is the Bible land. We keep going on due west to the Atlantic Ocean. We arrive at the shores of these United States of America on the coastline of Georgia and South Carolina. Isaiah said this nation has sent its ambassadors by sea in water-drinking vessels upon the waters. The American ambassadors can go only to Mexico and Canada by land, more than most any other nations. And I remember when I was a little boy, and my mother and Dad, when it was what's the word, chick thing to do, that millions of people went abroad on an ocean cruise. And now today, if you're really somebody, you go by airplane. But anyway, so we find that more than any other nation, we sent out millions of our ambassadors by sea. But not until the last few years we were able to send them on the buzzing wings. By sea they've gone, and for most of our history in water-drinking vessels. That's what a steamship is. It must drink great quantities of water for their boilers. Now, I know today that with all of these woolly-looking boogers running around, you know, these would-be Willie Nelsons, these protein balls of hair that are running around, and I myself, I am a bearded man, but during the Second World War, you had to be a very high-ranking officer even to wear a mustache. That included the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and the Air Force was part of the Army. But, so a nation tall and smooth-shaven. Now, I think your King James, as some of these say, tall and peeled. Now, you've noticed how few foreigners are of our height. In both world wars, the United States Army was the tallest army on record, and among them, as I said, there was very few mustaches and no beards, except today, everybody wants to be an individualist. Everybody wants to be, I don't know what they call them now, hippies or whatever, but I'm not putting that down because I think maybe this is something stirring within the realm of God's people to go back the way the Heavenly Father designed Mother Nature for us to grow a beard. But for a time it proved a point as to the identity of who and where we were. And it goes on to say that that is a people that was terrible from their beginning onward. So we were born by defeating the greatest powers in all Europe, the British Empire, not only once but twice. And then we turn around and we whipped the North African pirate kings to whom even proud Britain was paying tribute. And we ended Spain's dominance and their dream of taking over this new world and establishing a worldwide empire. And we won 2 world wars, which might have gone the other way if we had stayed out. It would have been interesting to see how that has gone. But a nation, now get this is one of the main clues, and if you have trouble understanding this, I have some friends that are, they work on these road crews. They're surveyors. You might go talk it over with them. It says a nation that was measured out by lines underfoot, says Isaiah, and the United States Meets and Bounds Act, enacted by Congress about a century and 3/4 ago. They established the world's first system of surveying the whole nation into sections and townships laid out by the compass, which even today most nations do not have truly a nation measured out by lines on the ground underfoot. It is a nation who the lands and the rivers divide or quartered. Now, a lot of people I've heard use this analogy, drawn and quartered, and it was equated, just like Christ referred everything back to man and beast in those days, because 90% of the people back then lived off of nature and the land. They were farmers and they were hunters. And so when it talked of a land that was drawn and quartered, when you kill a deer or an elk or any wild animal for food, then you cut it from under the throat all the way to its tail. That's drawing it. And then you quarter it. You cut it across under the front 2 feet and just by the back 2 feet. Well, anyway, whether you like that analogy or not, and that is some translations of some certain Bibles, but it is a nation whose lands the rivers divide or quarter. The Mississippi River cuts our land in half from the north to the south. The Ohio River and its tributaries, they divide the eastern half in 2. And the Columbia and the North Platte, in related streams, they cut the western half in 2. And where else do you find a nation with which this would compare? Now, Isaiah says, all the inhabitants of the world and the dwellers on the earth, when a banner is raised on the mountains, you better look in fear and attend when the bugle is blown. Truly we're a nation terrible from their beginning onward. When our battle flag flies and the bugle calls our armies to war, the whole world used to listen. And they had learned that it was better to pay respectful attention or pay the consequences. When we had Teddy Roosevelt in there and men like him who said walk soft and carry a big stick, because cowardness and wimpinity shall never save nor preserve a nation very long. And so I maintain that there is no other nation on this earth which fits this entire description, but our nation does. And there is still one other point. Verse 7 says, at that time shall a present be brought to the Lord of hosts, a nation tall and smooth-shaven, a people terrible from their beginnings onward, a nation measured out by line underfoot, whose lands the rivers quartered, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts, Mount Zion. Up until the last few years, the last couple of decades, This was not a pagan nation like those of Asia and Africa, and it was not an atheistic nation like those of the crumbling communist empire, so they would have it think. It was a Christian nation, bringing its people and its strength and its hopes and its ideals as a present to our God. What is the glory that you can bring Him? Only obedience. I hear the prayers of those who keep my commandments and those who praise Him in truth and righteousness and law keeping. Other than that, He turns a deaf ear to you. This is why we're down the toilet, friends. It's been proved to you that we even today are living in biblical times, and it's also proved that you're living in a biblical land. One favorably mentioned in the Bible. The Bible's written about us, and it's written to us and for us, and it's our book, and we are its people. No longer can you be what Isaiah prophesied, the ox knows his crib. We're talking about the first chapter, I believe it is. The ox knows his crib, the sheep know their master, but my people do not consider. Now, the next thing that we're going to deal with here is a lot of people get all bent out of shape. Those that are still listening to the pabbling, puking preachers with their sloppy agape and this asinine Adam and Eve story that Eskimos and Japanese and Chinese and Jews and Gentiles, so-called, and all of these people come out of two people. Why, you go tell that to a scientist or anybody who's studied any type of genetics, and you're going to find yourself left alone very quickly. So I think it's very important here. I made some claims in this album about the Semitic man, the Adam-type man. As I said, Christ was called the second Adam, the Adon. How he was an invader here upon this earth. That he had come here and he was upsetting and causing great consternation and turmoil throughout the kingdoms of this world. And so when you tell a lot of those that belong to organized religion, and you tell them that Adam was not the first man, that there was people that preceded them, they get all bent out of shape. But I would cite to those religious people that this is why we have so many people on this world who become agnostics, because of the supposed conflict between the Bible and science. Now, in truth and reality, my dear friends, there is no conflict at all between a correct translation of the Bible and really proven science. Not just unproved theories. Remember, folks, well, as most of you know, I don't mean to be insulting, but a theory simply means something that is not proven. Now, one of these supposed great conflicts between the fact that science knows what human beings, that they have lived upon the earth far longer than the few thousands of years covered by the Bible, and the common belief that the Bible says that Adam was the first man. But the truth is, the Bible nowhere says that Adam was the first man. Yes, I know what most of the preachers say, but the Bible doesn't. It merely says that Adam was the first Semitic, or, forgive me, my friends, white man. Let's look at the record. The many mistranslations in the King James Version obscure most of the truth. For example, in Genesis, the first chapter, verses 1 and 2, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. In the Hebrew, it says how the earth had become chaotic and empty. And to prove this and see the explanation of this, we told you to turn to Jeremiah, the 4th chapter, and he quotes the very second verse here. Now, you see the Rotherham's emphasized Bible. That is some very catastrophic things that wrecked this earth, but as I gave you my opinion before, it was talking about at a time when many earths were in great catalytic upheaval beyond the scope of my imagination. What a frightening, awesome thought to think of a war of the worlds and of many worlds being involved. But I don't think up until this present time, till I was the first kook to come along and try to expound upon this. Well, no, that's not fair. I'm not really. There's shells of kooks out there, from von Daniken and quite a number of others that recognized there was things, but they didn't tie it in with the Bible because they were too damn chicken. They didn't want to tie it in with any New Testament stuff, for fear of the Jewish publishers would not publish it. As long as they kept to the Old Testament and glorified those people, that was fine. But let's don't talk about any converted Hebrews or Israelites of the New Testament. But as I say, go back and see Rotherham's emphasized Bible. That is some very catastrophic things, to say the least. They had wrecked the earth, which was not without form and void before that. There was a judgment of God on earlier civilizations for their wickedness, regardless about whether it took place on this world or in other worlds, as I imagine. And if you can't go along with that and you want to keep it down to just this little planet, that's fine. But as I think pointed out before, Jeremiah, the 4th chapter, 23 to 27, it gives us a vision of it, and it says, I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens they had no light, and I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly, and I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of the heavens were fled. When it's talking about the birds, something that flies, I think like the old Indians of the Americas when they talk about the great ancient iron thunderbirds. That's the birds that fled, and they fled with people in those birds. They escaped the catastrophic, dying, crumbling, atomic radiation-filled worlds that were no longer inhabited, and they became the pilgrims, the despots that escaped to this world. But you take it as far as you want to go. I will not limit your imagination. And I beheld the mountains, as I said, that they were governments and worlds, and they were places high up in the air, and they said, lo, and they trembled, and all the hills. I believe the worlds and smaller worlds said they moved lightly, and behold, and lo, there was no man, and all of the birds of the heavens were fled. The heavens, talking about bird ships of outer space. And I beheld, and there was no man. All the birds of the heavens were fled, and I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of, and speaking of a great Lord here, we can only assume that it was the Almighty Yahweh, and it tells of his fierce anger, for thus the Lord has said, the whole land shall become desolate, yet I will not make a full end. In other words, he didn't destroy any or all of these races that we spoke of back in Mu, that they spoke of 10 different types of people or races that were brought under the dominance of the mother Mu, or Mukai, the Khan, who claimed to come from, who was the firstborn descendant and a great Lord and God that came out of Mu, the motherland of space. Therefore, as we go back even in antiquity, coming down to earth, on this world here, we find buried ruins of cities that are much older than Adam, and skeletons which can be dated by carbon-14 tests and many other more advanced tests that go back thousands of years ago. And the Bible itself tells us of this. We go to Chicken Bone Hill in China, and they find the bones of great ancient Asians going back probably 1.5 million years ago. And we go in the caves of Kilimanjaro in Africa, and just to be conservative, they go back 75,000 years ago. And as we've pointed out in other tapes, there seems to be evidence of men going back 200,000-300,000, or even possibly up to 3 million years ago. Now, this is not just something that I dreamed up, but you go to, I want to lay some credit on Reader's Digest. They put out a big, handsome hardback book, which I happen to have a spare copy. If anybody wants to order one of them, they're kind of hard to find some of these bookstores, but it's called The Mysteries of the Unexplained. And they talk about and show and provide evidence that I think is very conclusive that there's been evidence of men for the last 2 to 3 million years upon this earth. But, you see, pre-Adamic, before Adam. But, see, it doesn't conflict with the Bible. Hey, I discovered this. I remember a few years ago there was a lady jumped up in my face who thought that she was a great student of Scripture, which she was, but I had spoken at this little meeting, and she says, I would like to take issue with you, Dr. Fredericks, about pre-Adamic people. I do not believe that. My Bible doesn't say it. She said, I want to know which Bible you use. I said, well, I'm not prejudiced. I use quite a number of them. Which one are you fanciful of? And she said, oh, the King James with Schofield footnotes. And I said, Madam, may I see your Bible for a moment? I said, have you ever bothered to read the footnotes? I said, read the footnotes of Matthew, the 13th chapter, I believe. You go in there, and old Schofield made a big issue out of this, that he said that these fallen extraterrestrial angels of the Almighty would be so bred in so close with earthmen, the sons and daughters of God, that only the angels of heaven would be able to tell at the harvest time when they came to separate the tares of the wheat, or Edom, from God's true Israel. And you go back and read your footnotes of Genesis and the Schofield. Oh, and a lot of people don't like him for this, and they don't like him for that, and they don't want to hear me quote this rabbi or that rabbi. Look, truth is where you find it. I don't care whether you like the guy or not. I've not liked very many ministers I've met in my life. There's probably, out of the whole bunch that I've known, there's probably one, possibly two. But I didn't want to get too close to them because they were still mortal men, subject to greed and weakness and compromising on the way to their horizon. But anyway, let's go back down to earth here. So we find, and let's re-examine, as the Bible tells us of the creation of men in the plural in Genesis 1:26 to 28, saying that male and female created he them. 1:27, and God told these people, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Genesis 1:28, if you want to look that up. But, my friends, as I said before, but I want you to keep this in mind, so you don't write me and say, hey, your stories don't jive here, when I say that there was several worlds in space that was involved in great catalytic upheavals, and if churchward, and there's a good possibility, I want to be fair, and I want to present his side of it, that, he gives all of the boundaries of all of this great land that was out in the Pacific, and, he paints a horrific picture, and he substantiates his evidence from quite a number of ancient, archaic historical books and records of ancient pre-Adamic men. And then he even noted, wasn't that something, how when all of the great land masses went under the great Pacific, the ironic name Pacific Ocean, like peaceful, calm. Maybe they really were continents there, and all of these ancient people who indulge in phallic worship and kinky sexual religious acts and cannibalism. Why, that ought to bring about some destruction by somebody. But there's a great possibility that this happened in antiquity, along with great wars and destructions that were being visited upon other worlds and planets out there. And so when you destroy millions of people for whatever reason, and then it says, go forth and replenish. So it shows us quite obviously that there was other people already here upon the earth. So he sent a new people we don't know how many centuries or millenniums later, to replace them, to replenish. And the Bible tells us of men in the plural, as I say, Genesis 1:26-28, it says, male and female created he them. And notice especially in 1:27, and God told these people, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Plenish is an obsolete English word. It means to fill, and you cannot replenish that which has not been plenished or filled or refill it. Therefore, in the next chapter of Genesis, Genesis 2, we find that Adam, in the singular, he created the word Adon, A-W-D-A-W-N, rendered Adam in English. It is from a root word meaning to show blood in the face, to be of a ruddy red complexion, a word obviously not applicable to the darker races which preceded this strange new red blushing man. We also know from scientific evidence to be much older, these people, than the white race. Now Bible scholars know, and they recognize that Genesis 3:20, and it says, and Adam called his wife Eve, because she was the mother of all living. And as I think we've pointed out, that was a later interpolation and was not in the earlier manuscript. For one point of reference, to bear me out, go look at James Moffat's translation, and he'll bear out what I said. And I think we know who Eve is. But you see, the adversary, that was not accidentally put in there. It shows that either the scribe, either he himself was of the ilk of the adversary or under the tutelage, or took money under the table, shall we say. He was paid off and told under the threat of heresy or bribery, whatever, he put it in there. So a lot of these descendants of Mu, Lamura, Cain, Con, that they could prove that they were descendants of the mother planet, in case any dumb Semitic Adamite should wake up and find who they were, from whence they came, and who and where their adversaries came from. So there was a plan and a purpose beyond the shadow of a doubt, in my opinion. So we find the 4th chapter of Genesis. It records the birth of Cain and Abel. In the Hebrew, the word changes suggested that they were twins. No other child of Eve is mentioned till the birth of Seth, as I've told you before, which Adam, when he was 130 years old. But I don't know as that's actually referring to a singular ancient king of the Adam or the Adon people, or was it talking about of this one particular man's rule through his descendants? Certainly long before, long after the birth of Cain and Abel, which most scholars say was over 100 years later. Yet Cain, he slew Abel. Now remember, I told you, I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is an ancient idiom that is talking about not just two men, but two great worlds, two great armies of men, regardless of their genealogy, or whether they be Mamzars, as the Hebrew calls them, or lily white. It does not matter. The fact is that Cain slew Abel in the field of battle, and field also means the world. Did he destroy a world? These are things that we must keep in mind and recognize that there is a possibility. Now, and in punishment he was driven out of the land or the world. And remember, he complained to God that anyone that should find him, he says, they're going to slay me. Find this in Genesis 4:14. And upon being sent away, or as I say, he was driven away. And I question people, driven away in what? And so I think that this was something of a great antiquity that never occurred here upon the earth. And we've proved this with what the meaning of the cherubims, and which were cherubims, the great ships that were to guard the very doors and the entrances and the household back to the Almighty, that they may not return and they may not once again retain, maintain, or be restored to immortality, because he did not want evil to have eternal life and to perpetuate itself throughout his universes and galaxy. So he provided a way out, for he says, when a man dies, he can sin no more. So we find we return back to those ancient days when Cain was sent away into whatever world or the land or to this world. It said Cain found what? Many other peoples. For Genesis 4:17 records that Cain not only married a wife, but it said he built a city. Some of them say a great city. Now that was quite a honeymoon feat, I would say. But when we deal with reality and we understand and know and we learn that he was talking about in idioms and allegories, that this is a time for us to awaken and to get our eyes open. And he was speaking of the pre-Adamic people that were mentioned in the latter parts of Genesis 1. Now we find the Garden of Eden was not a plantation of just ordinary trees and shrubs, and God did nothing so foolish as to make a special creation just to have a man to wield a shovel and pruning shears. And he already had millions of pre-Adamic people available for that sort of work. And we're told, well, now you say, oh, my. You get all bent out of shape. You go back and you read Isaiah, what was the 67th chapter, the scroll that Christ read up. And he said, arise and shine, for your light has come. And he spoke in the first paragraph or two in the singular. And later on, he said, we, those, they, them, speaking to you in a far-off generation. And what you have to do is find out your identity, who you are, from whence you came, and why you're here. Because the Almighty said, I have given you, the heathen, as an inheritance. Now, man has not assumed his role. And the southern white man thought that this meant that you were to have slaves and that it was all right to beat them with whips and so forth. Well, not so. Not so. Because slavery does not work. And the economy does not work when you take free slave labor and compete them against free men. Well, they won't be free very long. They themselves, they will be enslaved to that type of economic system, just like the poor average white man of the South. He never owned any slaves, never wanted to, never had the opportunity to, or the money. This was held by a handful of wealthy, select people. But we won't get into that, but yet there was tens of thousands of the poor, innocent, caught up in between white men who had to go out and die for those damnable merchants who bought and sold slaves and traded in human flesh and brought them in their stinking slave ships from the coast of Africa. Again, this was a curse brought upon mankind. Now, as I said, going back, you already had millions of people that were available for the work of laboring and maintaining and gardening and so forth. There's nothing sinful about that. It's an honorable thing. You look at the Chinese and the Japanese, what great diligent workers they were, and they told about, and their ancient records goes back and describes that for 20-some thousand years they existed in peace and harmony, and the smoke rose from their chimneys. They spoke in old idioms and etymology, and they did not have to fear their neighbors and worry about it. And what great tranquil lives, and how self-satisfying and happy they were to work in the soil and with nature. We find all of these ancient pre-Adamic civilizations here upon this earth. We've discussed them from the Peru to the Amazones to Guatemala and Honduras and Mexico, and how these people lived off of nature and the land, and they didn't have to pay taxes, and they didn't have to be drafted into armies, and they were full of harmony and peace. Well, I think we've covered that enough. And so then we're told that the Garden of Eden contained the tree of life, or the tree of knowledge or experience of good and evil. Now, when we find that no tree in the forest ever has knowledge or experience of good and evil, and I believe we pointed out that that a lot of times it's confusing to people because it's used allegorically. Take, for example, in Ezekiel, the 31st chapter, behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon with fair branches, and a shadowing bough of a high stature. Therefore his height was exalted above all of the trees of the field, and his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long. And all the fowls of the heavens made their nest in his boughs, and under his branches did all of the beasts of the field bring forth their young. And now this was not talking about the little Bambis out in the forest. It's talking in the idiom language. There were people up on this earth that were called beast people. Now we talk about the primitive type of different cavemen and some of the odd monstrosities of antiquity. Well, even these creatures, beasts with hands that worked in the field, they found safety and righteousness. It says when the stranger, those not of your land, he comes into your land, it said, put him under your laws. And so even the children of the beast and under his shadows dwelt many in all great nations. And it goes on, it says, the cedars in the garden of God could not hide him. So I really believe beyond the shadow of a doubt with all of my heart, this is allegorically and symbolically, this was not here on this earth, but it's talking about the trees of the garden of God out there, and it's talking about the type of people who could land in the highest branches, who was able to travel throughout the garden and the homesteads of the Almighty that spread throughout the great sea of space beyond the scope of our imagination. We find back in Psalms and Proverbs, we talk about those people who are above the other peoples in the heights of the heavens, and we discussed all of the different levels of that. And we find the cedars in the garden of God, it said they could not hide him. The fir trees were not like his boughs, and the chestnut trees were not like his branches, nor any tree in the garden of God was like unto him, and his beauty. See? I have made him fair by the multitude of his branches, so that all the trees of Eden that were in the garden of God envied him. Obviously, the trees in the garden of God of Eden, it was speaking, as we've pointed out before, family trees of races and nations who admired and envied the so-called Assyrian Empire. But was it speaking about all of the trees that pre-existed in the great garden of the Almighty Yahweh God, who came down here and saw this ancient Assyrian and his kingdom and his empire that he had established? And did they become jealous of that? Well, it takes a lot of research into the pages of antiquity, and I don't try to make up people's minds for them, because a lot of people, I say, their minds are already made up, so don't confuse them with the facts. But all of these made up the garden that was Adam's, that he allegorically was to cultivate. In other words, you cultivate your youth. You take control of them. You take charge of them. You rule over them with righteousness, with law. And you think this didn't pre-exist, that there was always law, because without law you have chaos. How utterly foolish for some asinine preacher to get up and say that we're not under God's law. We're not supposed to be. We are supposed to be. This is why we have chaos. So I believe at this time we'd ask you to please turn your tape over to side 2, and we will continue with our subject. All right, so we go back and we talk about the garden of the Almighty that Adam was to cultivate. And then we get to this Satan. As we said, he who commits treason, what we might call the superintendent of his planet, to rule in obedience to the Almighty's will until he forfeited that position by rebellion against the Almighty. And we don't think it was just one world. Not only this one, you see, this ties it all together, that he was in charge of this world and other worlds, and this is like his last Der Fuhrer bunker, like the last place that Hitler supposedly hid out if he did. And there seems to even be doubts about that. But this is sort of his, shall we say, Bunker Hill, or Wounded Knee, or kind of like Custer's Last Stand. We're speaking for the adversary. Our kingdom is not coming to an end, but the adversary's. Now, Adam was sent to take his place, as I said, and it was the Adam people's job to rule the various nations and races of this earth as God's representatives here, educating them in the Almighty's law and enforcing obedience to those laws. Now, these other races and nations that had been here long before the Adam. Now we find the Bible, this set of books, Biblios, it makes it unmistakably clear that we're not all descended from Adam and Eve, that there were other races on the earth already old and already numerous when Adam was created, or, shall we say, dispatched, transported. And among these other races, there were several who were simply pre-Adamic, and one at least that is satanic. Now, if you read the 3rd chapter of Genesis quite clearly or carefully, you'll notice that immediately after the fall of this mysterious Semitic Adam man, that the Almighty required them to answer what they had done, and the Almighty, he condemned Satan, and the word mistranslated in this part here, serpent, is from the word Nakesh, which literally means enchanter or magician. But, my friends, this man was skilled in the science that he had learned before he was cast out of this place in space, or heavens, if you like. And so, when the church world talks about him being a magician, let's be fair, like the Strong's Concordance, it goes back Nebuchadnezzar when he wanted someone to answer his dreams. He said to bring his engineers and his scientists. Now, King James didn't translate it that way, unfortunately, but here we're talking about a man who was a scientist, a people who brought, and is proven by the historical records of all of the ancient world, that there was men, Kukulkan and Mukai, Kaimu, and Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha, where these people learned science and great technology from the men gods, or god men that came from the sky. But no doubt about this so-called Satan, that he still possessed his angelic so-called powers, or he retained his scientific knowledge, and he was to be able to be a great, well, the church world calls him an enchanter and a magician, but he was a scientist of the highest type. And it's certain that the one who seduced Eve, or seduced these people, brainwashed them and cohabitated with them. And that is why that she admitted in the original Hebrew that Cain was the son of that, or these Khans were the son of that seduction. The Bible says the word beget with monotonous regularity. But the first time that the Bible ever says that Adam ever begot anyone was in Genesis 5:3, and it says, and Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth. And there's where the great war started, that we find through the records of the Egyptians. And I must go back, as so many people have written to me and asked me, please periodically refresh us and bring us up to date and tie it all together, because we can't retain all of these things. but the Egyptians and their records in the books of the dead, and they talked about the wars between Horus, their god, the hawk-headed god, who flew in the flying shields and had the eye in the sky, and who fought evil Seth. In other words, this Satan who came down here and established not only Mu and all of these ancient civilizations, and a little later on, maybe in some of the future tapes here, we can go in and talk and prove to you how actually Egypt was a Johnny-come-lately. And we go in and we can tie all of these ancient gods and their worship there, but it was about at this time, the beginning or shortly thereof, of the the Adamic people were here before the establishing of ancient, we're talking about old Egypt. And then this is where the interference and the wars became, and we talked about these ancient, mysterious Hyksos of shepherd kings, as they call them. Remember, we are called his flock, his sheep, and so we're talking about shepherd kings, great lords of space, who went into Egypt and they shut down their temples and their places of worship and so forth. So we're going back here. We're trying to figure all this out. That talked about in the period that Adam, he lived 130 years. He beget a son in his own likeness and after his image, and he called his name Seth. And when we go back to Genesis 3:15, the Almighty said to Satan, he who committed treason, I am going to put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. The same Hebrew word for seed is used in both cases. Satan was to have had just a literal seed or descendants of these people of Eve and the Adam, the Adam people. God's own word began pleading, or God's own word being pled, Jesus Christ himself, the Messiah of the New Testament. He tells us of it. As we go to Matthew, you've heard me speak of this before. Now we're going to kind of nail it to the wall here. In Matthew 13:38 and 39 explains the parable of the tares among the wheat, when Yahshua the Messiah said, the field is the world, and the good seeds are the children of the kingdom, and the tares are the children of the wicked one, and the enemy that sowed them is the devil. Again in John 6 chapter 70 and 71 verse, Yahshua had been talking with his 12 disciples. When we read, Jesus answered them, said, have not I chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil? He spoke of Judas Iscariot, which originally meant man of Iscariot. This is more King James mistranslation. He was the son of Simon, for it was that he should betray, being one of the 12. And again, you should read carefully the 8th chapter of John, when Yahshua told them that those who hated him, you're of your father the devil, the lust of your father you would do. He wasn't merely just being vulgar and abusive in either of these cases, where he never resorted to name-calling or abuse. When he did call some of them hypocrites, they truly were. So his statements were precisely accurate. He did not call them serpents or children of vipers. I mean to say, he did call some of them serpents, and he called them vipers, which again was accurate. Long before this, they had adopted the serpent emblem of Satan, which is why their tradition means enchanter. And I have, it was just a few years back here, they discovered a temple down in old Mexico that had serpents carved all over the outside and the inside of it, and it was called the Temple of the Enchanter, or the Serpent. So you see, all of these things, when we declared to you and cited to you about this long curved snake that takes in about a quarter of a mile, they found in Ohio, and is several feet tall and has an open mouth. But you see, man has neglected his Bible. He's neglected to understand the secrets of the Bible in the heavens, which is the ancient astronomy and the symbology theology of it, what has taken place in the past and the present and promises of the future pertaining to nations and races and peoples. Now, so we find, or serpent, as a lot of people prefer that word, in this case he was simply stating a biological fact with scientific precision and identifying the personage of these people's ancestors, who were, once again, tying it all together, the ancient people of Mu, of Lemura, and all of these ancient colonies of pre-Adamic people that pre-existed way long prior to the advent of the Adamic man coming to this earth. Now, whenever someone tells you that the Bible's in conflict with modern science, you tell them that's not so, that it's been proven true, that the two can coexist side by side through an honest translation and honest scientists, that the things that many of these preachers teach us, they keep us in conflict because they are in conflict with scientific truth. And we all know that when these preachers are equally in conflict with the Bible, you go back to the Bible, not to any man-made doctrines and interpretations, and you double-check it for yourself and for accuracy of the translation. And you'll find what the Bible really says in its original language is accurate with a precision that our scientists have not yet achieved. And as I told you, one of the main sources of reference that will help you and guide you, and it doesn't have all the answers, but it'll bring you out of this enigma, this great mystery of darkness, and that woven, the dark mantle woven by organized religion and passed on to us to leave us in total confusion. So I believe, dear friends, this will conclude this tape, as we do not have enough time left on it to really get into anything and prove it at this point. Thank you for listening. Write me, P.O. Box 1086, Pilgrim Ships, Lakeview, Missouri 75737. And we thank you so much for you faithful listeners.